So it's been about 6 months since I've done a third gen Prelude project video. Some of that is because the winter time is our busiest time of the year here in the shop. Some of that has to do with I was waiting for some parts. We got our cylinder head completely refreshed. That took a little while. Some of it has to do with we've been taking on a lot of new projects, releasing quite a few new Honda parts if you guys have been following. But today, this is going to be a pretty major update in our third gen project. I've got a bunch of stuff to show you as far as what we've been working on for the H22 engine, what specifically I've done to this H22 engine. I'm also going to have a surprise for you when it comes to the transmission department. And hopefully by the end of this video, this engine is permanently mounted into our third gen project so we can finally go into the final assembly process. And I'm officially putting a somewhat end date on this project, which is going to be the Honda meet in Lake Elsinore, California in the middle of May. I would like to have this car finished by then. I'm probably going to be able to have a booth there, and I'll have this car on display as well as some of our new Honda products that we've been working on. But for that to happen, there is still a ton of things to do. I actually sat down and I wrote a list out of all the things that are left on this project, and after I got into the second page, I kind of stopped and realized that there's still a lot to do. So while that's a ton of work for me, that probably means more Prelude video content for you guys. So anyway, let's get started and hopefully let's get this engine bolted back in this car for the last time. So where are we at right now? Currently, we have our Japanese H22A engine block that we got because our A2 engine block was no good. I have just bolted on this Arlington machine, completely refreshed H22A cylinder head. I'm going to show you guys some of the process of how that happened. And then I also now have a 5th gen Honda Prelude M2Y4 transmission bolted up to the engine. The transmission that originally came in the car was actually from a Honda Accord, and those gears don't really match the H22A very well, so I knew I was going to have to get a transmission specifically designed for the H22 engine. However, after completely disassembling this transmission and cleaning it and putting it all back together and getting it ready to mount on the engine, I kind of decided to go a different route. So my friend Craig at Krager's Headers was able to source me a H22A Euro R transmission, which is probably going to be the absolute best option for this project. The Euro R transmission comes with a factory LSD and shorter gears even than the original Prelude H22 transmission. So our first step before this engine goes back in the car today is to remove this 5th gen Prelude transmission, go get our new Euro R transmission. I'm going to clean it up quite a bit, install our flywheel and clutch, and then install the transmission, and then we can drop the engine back in the car. But before we get into that, let me show you the process of attaching the refreshed Arlington machine H22 cylinder head to our block. So I've had really good success with an ARP and Cometic gasket combo, so that's what I went with here. Arlington machine did a full pressure test on this cylinder head before disassembling it, doing a ton of cleaning and all of the machine work required to get this thing back up to brand new condition. The quality of work is some of the best machine work that I've ever seen on a cylinder head. Their deburring is just incredible. Every single sharp surface has been cleaned up. After thoroughly cleaning the block's deck surface, then it was time to install the ARP studs and Cometic gasket. Once the studs are lubricated and installed into the engine block, I also like to put a small amount of the included lubricant onto the threads before dropping the cylinder head on. The reason I do this is because it's very difficult to add that lubricant once the cylinder head is slid down onto the studs. I also add lubricant to the insides of the nuts as well, but we want to make sure that this thread is as lubricated as possible because having a lubricated thread is what ensures the most accurate torque. Once the cylinder head is mostly seated, then I just use a screwdriver to help guide the washers and the nuts down onto the studs. I lubricate the bottom side of the washer before it's slid down, and I also apply the included grease to the bottom of the nut, and I press some inside of the thread so that everything is as lubricated as possible. ARP recommends a 3-step process for torquing the cylinder head down. The 3 steps are 30 pounds, 60 pounds, and 90 pounds. I, however, also just do sort of like a 5 to 10 pound torque in the very beginning just to make sure that all of the nuts are sort of seated and the head is squished down onto the gasket. This ensures that when you have your torque wrench out, you don't sit there and sort of ratchet a bunch of times unnecessarily before you reach your first 30 pound torque. The cylinder head gets torqued down, working your way from the inside out. There are 10 bolts total, so you're going to go down the middle, the first two, and then you're going to go over to one side to one of them, and then the opposite across the other side, and then across from that, and across from that, and you're going to work your way around until all 10 of them are torqued to the 30 foot-pounds. After the 30 foot-pounds is done, then you're going to do the 60 in the same pattern, and when the 60 is done, then you do the 90. The reason that I'm bolting the cylinder head on in the car is because doing that 90 foot-pounds of torque on an engine stand is actually pretty difficult. So that's why I put the head on in the car before taking it out to do the final assembly. With the head torqued down, then it was time to just lower the engine out of the car. I really enjoy having a lift to do stuff like this because I can just leave the engine on a little cart and raise the car off of the engine. Working on the engine when it's on a cart is actually much easier than using a cherry picker, pulling it out, bolting it to an engine stand, doing all of that. But here's the engine after the final assembly, getting the camshafts in and all of the timing stuff taken care of. So that brings us back to where we started this video. Let's get this 5th gen transmission off so that we can prep the Euro R trans and get all the clutch assembly put together. In a previous video, I showed that I was going to be using an ACT heavy-duty clutch on this project. Since then, I've decided to sort of go a different route. Because I want this car to be very comfortable to drive, I ended up changing over to an Exidy OEM replacement clutch. So now we're going to install our lightweight chromoly flywheel and our Exidy clutch before we clean up that Euro trans and then bolt it on. I like to use a blue 243 Loctite on the flywheel bolts. It actually gives it a small amount of lubricity when you're torquing it, and it just ensures that there's no possibility of the bolts coming back out via vibration through the crankshaft. So Honda recommends torquing the flywheel bolts to 76 foot-pounds. We're going to start by just doing the flywheel bolts to 40 pounds first, and then we'll do 76 on a second step. Honda also recommends doing it in a cross-hatch pattern, so back and forth across, to evenly distribute the torque of the flywheel so you're not doing it in, say, like a circular pattern or something like that. So we're going to start with 40 foot-pounds. And then 76. Before I put the pressure plate on, I'm going to put a small amount of grease into the pilot bushing just to lubricate for when installing the shaft. Also, when the clutch is depressed, the input shaft of the transmission is going to be rotating on this pilot bushing. So we want to make sure that there's at least a little bit of lubricant in there to just sort of give it a helping chance of having a long life. Next, I'm going to take a little bit of acetone on a rag and just clean up the clutch mating surfaces for the clutch disc. This is actually really important to remove any grease and oil from here because it can contaminate the clutch disc itself and cause it to either begin to slip or prematurely wear. You can see how much was on there that we removed. Next is the pilot tool into the bushing. The clutch pressure plate actually has an orientation on the flywheel. There's 3 dowel pins that hold it into position, but the spacing between the dowel pin and the bolt that's next to it is not the same on all 3. There's one that's spread out a little bit further. If you look here, this hole and this hole are further apart than this hole and this hole. So you need to find the one that's spaced further and align that one first. Then we can install the hardware. It isn't necessary that you use Loctite on this hardware, but I just like to use it for a little bit of insurance. This is a sort of light-duty blue Loctite. It's not, it doesn't actually hold the bolt on tighter. What it does is it just snugs up the fit in the thread so that there's less chance of the bolt rattling loose. These bolts are torqued to 19 foot-pounds, but we're going to work them in slowly before we get to our final torque. I'm going to tighten one side a little bit and then the opposing side. We want to try to install these bolts with an even pressure because if you tighten down one side of the pressure plate before the other one, what can happen is as the plate rotates this way, the disc is actually going to be pressed away from the side that you're tightening, and it can cause misalignment problems with the transmission. So we just take our time to work our way around the bolts until the pressure plate is almost tightened, and then we go back and do a final torque. With the pressure plate snug down, now we can go back into our final torque of 19 pounds. You're also going to use a crossing pattern when tightening the pressure plate here. So unfortunately, I actually just dropped my tripod and broke it. And I film all these videos with my phone, and so the clip that holds my phone is no longer in service. But anyway, here is our new Euro R transmission. It's been sitting around apparently because it's quite dirty. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and clean it up so that we can install it on our engine. So I actually just realized that I did this same cleaning process to my 5th gen Prelude transmission. So what I'm going to do, since my tripod is broken, I'm actually going to input the footage of me cleaning that 5th gen transmission here, just so you can imagine what I did to this Euro R transmission, and that way I don't have to try to hold onto my phone while I'm cleaning it. I wish I could say that there was a really easy way of cleaning dirty things like this transmission, but honestly I found the best way to do it is just put a lot of elbow grease into it. So I usually start with like a Dawn spray soap to penetrate all of the oil and grease that's on the casing. I'll scrub it with Scotch-Brite heavily, and then I'll sort of wash it off with a carb cleaner. And then I'll go back again with some more Dawn soap and hit all the little details that are missing, and just go ahead and repeat this process over and over again until it's as clean as I'd like. Here's the Euro R transmission about halfway through that process. All right, so cleaning this thing up took quite a bit longer than expected. This transmission was actually really filthy. And there was just a lot of scrubbing to be done to get all of the grime off of it. But it came out pretty good. I'm about 90% happy with this. But now it's time to bolt the transmission onto the engine. And then we're going to lower the car down. And I'm going to pull out the engine mounts that are on the frame rails right now and show you the last little modifications that I did to get the engine to sit correctly. So I'm going to bolt this transmission on, and then I'm going to lower the car down, and I'll get back to you. Those of you that have followed along with the saga of this project know that one of the big hurdles that we overcame early on was the engine mounting kit for putting the H22 into this car. This was originally an innovative engine mounting kit, but the engine really sat terribly. And part of that had to do with the fact that this car was originally automatic, so that bracket on that frame rail did not fit at all. And then alternatively, once I did get the transmission side all sorted out, this driver's side engine mount again, just did not fit correctly. The engine sat sort of like crooked and, leaning in basically every wrong direction that there was. So in earlier episodes, we remade this bracket on the transmission frame rail to hold up the transmission straight. We remade the rear T bracket so that the lean and tilt of the engine was correct. And then we got about halfway through this driver's side mount. So before I bolt the engine in the car, I just want to show you the final solution for what I came up with on the driver's side mount on this innovative mounting kit. So originally, the engine mount bolt that was here was actually closer to here. And so this whole engine mount had to move back towards the shock tower for the engine to sit straight. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to unbolt this engine mount, and I'll show you all the things that I changed and the solutions, so that just in case you do have this engine mount kit and for some reason you want to modify it and not buy a kit that just fits correctly like me, this is what I did. All right, let me see if I can do this with one hand. But originally this engine mount had 3 mounting locations. One here, which was actually here. One here, which was actually here. And then this one, which I have not changed. On the bottom of this mounting bracket, there were these odd like steel tubes that were welded on as a riser, which is a weird way of mounting an engine mount into a car, because what you really want is a flat surface mounting on a flat surface, not the end of a round tube. So what I had to do, again, was this whole engine mount had to move back towards the shock tower. So I cut off the end here, and I cut off the end here. I re-drilled this hole just back and then cleaned up the edge. On this one, because they had their logo sort of laser cut out, I had to weld up a large portion of their logo before I could re-drill this hole. And then I just sort of reshaped this outside edge again here. Now, because I didn't want to just have some steel tubes welded on the bottom of this, I just sort of sanded it down and cleaned up the bottom of it. And remember, this whole engine mount had to move towards the strut tower. What I ended up doing was I machined an adapter plate. So this is where that front hole mounted before. And since the whole engine mount shifted back, I would have no longer had a place to bolt that front mount, or I would have had to modify that engine mount from Innovative even more, which the way that it was created would have been a little bit difficult. So instead I made this adapter spacer. So this gets rid of the steel tubes that are welded on the bottom. It's a nice flat surface for that engine mount to bolt to. I have a counterbore bolt in the frame here, and this gives me a new hole that's female and threaded that's moved forward a little bit. And then this is just a through hole that goes into the original threads that are in the frame. That way this whole mount can just sit on top of this bracket. I can use sort of normal hardware and then again, sort of normal hardware on the top. One thing that ended up happening after I sort of got the engine mount into position here was that the engine mount sat a little bit higher to get the engine straight. So there's a little gap here. So I am going to have to machine a little spacer that goes in between the engine mount and this part of the body of the car. But that was my solution, and I'll show you sort of everything I'll put together once we do drop the engine in. But because some of those engine mounts have been modified, I need to go ahead and get them all painted so that I can do a final install with them. So I'm going to paint them right now. This is the engine and transmission bolted together mostly. I'm actually going to change the bell housing hardware so it's just sort of half bolted on there. But the engine mounts are on, the engine bay is ready. So let's drop it in. So it's difficult for me to film this again because my camera mount's broken, but I'm basically doing the same thing as the way that we removed the engine. So the engine is still on that cart that it was on, and I'm very carefully lowering the car down onto the engine. The H22 is very wide compared to the original engine. So if we look here, you can see that that engine mount post is just about touching the frame rail. And on this side, we are just barely squeezing this engine mount between that bracket. So this is a very slow, careful, tedious process. And I'm just inching it down a little bit at a time, checking for clearance, making sure that I'm not destroying anything. Well, it's in. Let me show you some of the small details that I've been adding onto this engine before it went back into the car. There's plenty of small things that have changed that I haven't mentioned or that I haven't posted about. So let's go over them sort of one by one. All of the small things that are different than the mock-up engine, or just in general things that have changed since the last videos a while ago. So the biggest thing that has changed the look of the engine, of course, is that the valve cover that we shaved is now painted. This is a high temperature gunmetal paint with plenty of clear coat on top of it. I'm really happy with the way that this came out. I'll actually sort of do another follow-up video. I recorded the process of painting the valve cover. Since the last videos, we actually started making some H22 parts. So the first H22 part that we made was this billet water neck. The reason that I made this was I wasn't really happy with the sort of S layout that Preludes have for an upper radiator hose. So I wanted a solution to have more of a straight shot. I think that this will sort of tidy up the look on the front of the engine. We also released our H22 billet spark plug cover, which I'm really happy about, and our Type R style billet oil cap. So this is sort of mimicked after the Integra Type R and Civic Type R chrome oil cap, but a little bit smaller, and it just sort of goes with the aesthetic of all the billet parts that I'm going to be adding. On the engine side, unfortunately, I didn't really videotape the assembly of the engine. This is that Arlington machine cylinder head that I showed you guys that is a full refresh. Everything is pretty much brand new on it. But the camshafts are stock, but I did replace the aluminum crank pulley that was on this engine. I replaced it with a Euro R single row pulley. So it is a dampened single row pulley because we're going to be getting rid of the power steering on this setup. We are going to be keeping the alternator, obviously, and the air conditioning, though. A somewhat seemingly small detail, but something that I think is going to make a big difference overall is that I've been going around the entire engine and replacing all of the standard gold zinc hardware with silver zinc hardware. This is mainly because the theme that I'm going for on the look in the engine bay is sort of a raw aluminum and a billet and black theme. So just a couple of colors here. And the gold zinc is quite a contrast against the billet parts and other silver parts. So everywhere that I could, I went ahead and went in and replaced all of the hardware with silver zinc hardware. So for example, a clutch slave cylinder, I went so far as to replace all the hardware that holds the transmission together. The shifter assembly hardware is all replaced with silver zinc. The cleaned thermostat housing, all of that stuff, the thermostat cover, silver zinc. When it comes to like the intake manifold side, all the hardware on the intake manifold has been replaced with silver zinc hardware. I'll obviously continue that with, say, like the distributor. I'm still looking to find, the reason that the transmission is not completely bolted on is because I haven't found the right length silver zinc hardware for the bell housing that is a flanged M12. All the stuff that I've been finding is not flanged like that guy, and I am not super stoked on that look. So I'm still looking for it, but I'm going to replace all the bell housing bolts with silver zinc hardware as well. Oh, almost forgot to mention, same thing for like the AC bracket and alternator bracket and engine mount hardware. All of that stuff is all silver zinc. So I guess I'll just wrap up this video with some flybys of the engine in the car. Hopefully you guys can see sort of the details that I've been putting into this and the extra elbow grease to clean everything up as clean as possible. I'm really not a fan of spray painted engines and engine components. It's real easy to rough up all of this stuff and just take it with a silver spray paint. It's very common in the Honda scene. It sort of makes me cringe because, one, it doesn't really look like it's supposed to look, because the original clean aluminum look actually looks the best. And second, that paint does not last. After a couple of heating cycles, or you get some coolant on it, or you get some oil on it, or fingerprints or whatever, that paint just starts falling off and it looks terrible. It is so much more difficult to unpaint an engine than to just go ahead and clean it from the get-go. So it's been a really crazy long day. But the engine is in the car. It's about 10:30 at night on Sunday. It's time to go home, go take a shower, get ready for the week. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next episode.